Welcome back, viewers, to the latest researches and news. This might be one of the most significant updates we've brought you so far. According to latest reports, senior Ethiopian National Defense Force commanders have held an emergency meeting after concluding they are being squeezed from 3 separate directions at once today. We're walking through exactly what's being planned, where troops are pulling back from, and then we're going to spend real time analyzing what this could actually mean going forward from every angle. Let's get into it. Viewers, according to recent reports coming out of Ethiopia, senior Ethiopian National Defense Force commanders held an emergency meeting to review the rapidly shifting military situation and decide on a new operational approach. The meeting was reportedly led by the Ethiopian National Defense Force Chief of Staff and focused on developments across several key battle lines, along with the mounting pressure facing federal forces. An emergency meeting chaired directly by the Chief of Staff is not routine. This is the kind of meeting called when the existing strategy is no longer considered sustainable, and a real course correction is needed at the highest level of command. Viewers, commanders reportedly assessed that Tigray Defense Force and Fano allied forces have made extensive preparations along 3 main approaches: a western axis along the Sudan border, a northern front around Raya Alamata, and an eastern corridor running through Bure and the strategically important town of Mili, near the Djibouti border. According to the assessment, this means federal forces are now having to respond to pressure in several widely separated areas at the same time, making it far harder to concentrate their combat strength on any single front. This is exactly the kind of multi-front strategy we broke down in our earlier analysis of Tigray Defense Force strategy, deliberately spreading pressure across separate fronts to stretch the opposing force thin. Seeing Ethiopian National Defense Force commanders themselves reportedly acknowledge this in an internal assessment is a strong confirmation that the strategy is working as intended, at least from the federal side's own internal perspective. Commanders reportedly identified a significant shift in the fighting inside Amhara region. Fano units are said to have moved beyond mostly guerrilla-style operations, adopting a more active, counter-offensive posture instead. The assessment further alleges that Fano has received substantial external support, adding to the pressure on government forces and raising the possibility of coordinated operations across multiple fronts at once. This shift from guerrilla warfare to open counter-offensive operations is a meaningful evolution. Guerrilla tactics typically rely on hit-and-run attacks against a stronger opponent. Shifting toward direct counter-offensives suggests Fano's leadership believes it now has the strength, coordination, and possibly the external backing to hold and take ground directly, rather than simply harassing federal positions. Particular concern was reportedly raised over military movement around the Raya Alamata front, especially in the mountainous Zobu area. According to the assessment, these movements could put federal units at risk of becoming operationally isolated or encircled. Units linked to Tigrayan forces, including Army 31, the same unit we've already told you crossed into Amhara and later faced a drone strike in Watwat Mariam, were reportedly identified as actively maneuvering and posing a serious threat to federal positions. Encirclement is one of the most dangerous situations a military unit can face because it cuts off resupply, reinforcement, and retreat routes all at once. The fact that this specific concern is being raised about the same Zobu area we've covered before, where the Ethiopian National Defense Force had been reinforcing high ground, suggests that even those reinforced positions are now seen as vulnerable rather than secure. Based on these assessments, the military command has reportedly decided to abandon a number of exposed positions and consolidate its forces behind more defensible lines. On the Raya Alamata axis specifically, the reported plan calls for federal forces to withdraw from forward positions, abandon Wuldia entirely, and establish a new defensive line around Massa. As we already told you, this connects directly to the earlier reports we covered about the Ethiopian National Defense Force shifting some troops and heavy weapons from Kobo to Wuldia. That repositioning now appears to have been a temporary staging step rather than a long-term defensive plan, as Wuldia itself is now reportedly being abandoned as well. This is a major reversal from what we reported earlier. If Wuldia, a location we told you was being reinforced as a fallback position behind Kobo, is now itself being abandoned, that suggests the situation has deteriorated faster than the earlier reinforcement plan anticipated. During their reported withdrawal, Fano forces reportedly launched a surprise attack on a retreating government convoy, destroying 13 vehicles and capturing 2 patrol vehicles as Ethiopian National Defense Force units abandoned their forward positions and pulled back toward the town of Nekemti. Retreats are widely considered one of the most dangerous maneuvers in warfare, precisely because withdrawing forces are exposed and less able to defend themselves while in motion. An ambush during exactly this kind of withdrawal, resulting in over a dozen destroyed vehicles, reinforces just how costly this consolidation phase is proving to be for the Ethiopian National Defense Force, beyond simply giving up territory. On the eastern axis, commanders reportedly expressed concern that the strategic Djibouti-Mille corridor could be threatened or completely cut off. In response, the Ethiopian government is reportedly preparing to pull its forces back toward Chifra and establish defensive positions there in an effort to preserve this key route and prevent further isolation of its units. The Djibouti corridor is not a minor route. Djibouti serves as Ethiopia's primary access point to the sea, since Ethiopia itself is landlocked. Any real threat to this corridor would carry economic consequences far beyond the immediate military situation, since a huge share of Ethiopia's trade moves through Djibouti's ports. That's likely exactly why this particular axis is being treated with such agency. On the Western Front, following what's being described as a decisive setback at the Shererina border area with Sudan a couple of weeks ago, the Abiy Ahmed government has reportedly abandoned its plans to advance into Tigray from the west entirely. Instead, forces in this area are reportedly preparing to withdraw into defensive positions. This confirms something significant. Shererina wasn't just a battle we reported on for its own sake. It appears to have directly changed federal strategic planning, shutting down an entire planned offensive route rather than just resulting in a single lost engagement. These developments stand in sharp contrast to the tone the Abiy Ahmed government has maintained for more than 2 years. The administration has repeatedly projected confidence in its ability to defeat its opponents, frequently declaring its forces would crush anyone challenging the government, even stating it could do so against the combined support of Eritrea and Sudan together. The latest reported battlefield decisions instead point toward a clearly defensive posture, withdrawal from exposed positions, consolidation of remaining forces, and efforts to prevent key routes and units from being cut off entirely. Now let's look at where this could realistically go from here. Consolidating forces behind more defensible lines can be a sound short-term move. It reduces the risk of encirclement and buys time to regroup. But it also concedes significant territory, including Wodea, a location we had already flagged as strategically important along the A2 highway. If Tigray Defense Force and Fano forces continue advancing rather than pausing to consolidate their own gains, this defensive line could come under pressure again fairly quickly. An army that has spent over 2 years being told it would crush its opponents is now visibly retreating on 3 fronts at once. This kind of gap between official rhetoric and battlefield reality can seriously affect troop morale, and we've already seen, through the defections and surrenders we've reported near Reyakobo, that morale problems are already an active issue within federal ranks. A retreat of this scale is very difficult to keep quiet, especially with Fano and Tigray Defense Force, aligned sources actively publicizing captured vehicles, weapons, and abandoned positions. This could increase domestic political pressure on Abiy Ahmed's government, particularly given how far current events depart from years of confident public statements. If Tigray Defense Force and Fano forces continue gaining ground while federal forces consolidate defensively, this could shift the balance of leverage in any future negotiation, including the kind of Nairobi talks we've discussed, or the conditions tied to the unresolved Pretoria Agreement. A side that is expanding territorial control generally negotiates from a stronger position than one that is retreating. The Eastern Axis concern over the Djibouti corridor adds an economic dimension that could draw in wider international attention, given how critical that route is to Ethiopia's trade. A serious threat to this corridor could prompt increased diplomatic involvement from countries with a stake in regional stability and trade routes beyond just the parties directly involved in the conflict. The greatest risk for the Ethiopian National Defense Force right now is that a defensive consolidation, if not managed carefully, can turn into a rolling retreat where each new defensive line proves only temporarily holdable before the next withdrawal becomes necessary. Similar to what we've already seen with Wodea being abandoned so soon after being reinforced. So here's the full picture. Ethiopian National Defense Force commanders are reportedly pulling back on 3 separate fronts at once, abandoning Wodea for a new line near Massa, preparing to fall back to Chifra to protect the Djibouti corridor, and shelving plans to advance into Tigray from the west after the Sherina setback, all while Fano and Tigray Defense Force forces continue applying pressure and capturing territory and equipment along the way. Whether this becomes a stable, defensible consolidation or the beginning of a much larger collapse in federal positions is something we'll only know in the coming weeks. We'll be tracking every one of these fronts closely for you. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss what happens next.